It's that special time of the month again where everyone should go to the Epic Games Launcher, the Unreal Engine section, the Marketplace tile, and check out the free content for the month. Right there in the Marketplace tile, you'll see the free for the month assets available directly for download. Additionally, if you go to the free section, in the free for the month section, all the free packs will be displayed there, once again available for download. If you go to the free section, there's also a permanently free collection available for download. These are incredibly valuable assets, but these are always available for anyone to download at any time. Additionally, in the free drop-down menu, there's an Epic Games content area. Here are some really valuable resources that can be really helpful in your projects, like the automotive bridge, the automotive beach scene, as well as all the Infinity Blade content. But also be aware that all the Paragon characters are available for download here, and these can be really helpful learning resources. These are chock filled with animations, animation blueprints, audio files, effects files, and all of this can be really valuable learning resources for both educators and students. Once again, be sure to check out all of the free Marketplace content, the permanently free collection, and all of the Epic Games content free for download, both for teaching and learning as really valuable assets. For more information about how all of this amazing content can be used specifically inside of a classroom or a teaching scenario, please be sure to go to unrealengine.com. There you'll find a Marketplace drop-down menu, as well as the Marketplace guidelines. There you'll find all the information you need. And if you're interested in becoming a Marketplace seller, be sure to go to YouTube to the Unreal Engine channel and check out the Educator Livestream playlist. There we did a live stream called Becoming an Unreal Engine Marketplace Seller. This was a great live stream filled with really valuable information. Hello and welcome to another Friday live stream. We are excited to have some great guests today, and today's stream is Becoming a AAA Animator, and we've got Jay Hosfelt, who's joining us, who is a veteran animator from Epic Games, and Cody Bellimer and Ray Arnett, both also senior animators at Epic Games. And we're really excited about this stream. We mentioned that we were going to have it last week, and we have, as usual, Tom Shannon joining us and Mark Flanagan.
Hello.
Hey there.
Hello.
Great to be here.
So we've got a lot to talk about today. We've been doing a series on becoming a AAA developer, and we've had some really amazing guests. We've had a stream that we've done recently about becoming a AAA audio designer. We've done a stream on environment art. We've done a stream with technical artists. We've done a whole series, really about many of the different areas of developers that we have the honor and privilege of working with at Epic Games. And this one we're really excited about as well, because we've got some guys that we've worked with for a while. Jay has been working at Epic for a long time, and, we've run across each other a bunch of times and had a chance to work together. And he introduced me to Cody recently, and I've known of Ray as well. And we haven't had a chance to work together, but, it's really a treat to have these guys on the stream. But let's take a few minutes as usual and have you guys introduce yourselves to everyone who's joined us in the chat and tell us a little bit about, your background as an animator, your time at Epic, and sort of what sort of brought you to this point in your career. And how about we start with you, Jay?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm a lead animator on special projects at Epic Games. And so we work on things like the Unreal Engine 5 demo that you guys recently saw. I've been at Epic Games since 2003, so I can't even do the math, but it's been a while. I got into games. My first video game job was back in 1994. Can't do the math again, but it's been a long time. In my first game, I was actually painting pixels with a 256 color palette, so that's how old I am. I got into games really, like I went to art school actually with hopes of getting into like special effects and computer animation at the time, because that's what interested me, was creating imagery with computers. And back then, video games were, like I said, just pixels. All the cool stuff was like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, video games have caught up to that. And actually, a lot of the real challenges and joys have been in video games. And I've grown, like, I've always loved it. But there came a time where I was like, I don't want to work on movies ever. Like, I love it working on games. Yeah, that's what brings me here.
Awesome. Ray, how about we jump over to you and tell us a little bit about your background and how long you've been at Epic and kind of stuff you've gotten to work on.
Sure. So I've been at Epic for 11 years. I started in 2009. I started on Gears of War 3. Since then, I've worked on, I guess, most of the GDC kind of engine demos and stuff that we've done. I do my best to jump on whatever's hot at the moment. One of my favorite things about Epic is the variety of work that you can do. So yeah, I've worked on the GDC demos. I was on Paragon for pretty much the duration of that project. I've been on Fortnite on and off over the years, and I'm back on there currently. Before Epic, I worked at another game studio for a couple years, and then before that, I worked in visual effects for several years. I actually started my career on Garfield 2, the classic film.
Wow.
And worked on a few like visual effects movies, kind of like that, and then did a short. And that was all at Rhythm and Hughes. And then did a short stint at Sony ImageWorks on Surf's Up. I kind of came on the very end of that project.
Yeah.
Yeah, made the switch to gaming and haven't looked back. I love the work, and I love working at Epic. You're just surrounded by so many, inspiring and awesome people, and get to work on just dream projects.
Yeah. So you started as a traditional animator, keyframing for films primarily, right?
Right. Yeah, that was that was kind of my intro. I originally, to go back even further, I went to school, when you get out of high school, you have no idea kind of what's out there. At least I didn't. And I did some drafting classes in high school and really got into CAD, 3D modeling. And that was sort of what I thought that I wanted to do. So I actually was getting like an engineering design degree, and then did some independent studies in animation for the last couple years. And of course, was nowhere near a AAA animator by the end of that, but I'd kind of gotten the bug. So I decided to get a master's degree, started on that, and then dropped out after one semester. It was, it was getting kind of expensive, and I felt like, man, this is, I don't know, a little bit of review. And so I just started working on it on my own at night. Animation Mentor came around. I was in the very first class of that, and then I got hired out of there, like by maybe the third class or something. I got a contract at Rhythm and Hughes.
So that's still going on, right? Animation Mentors is
yeah, it is. There's so many more options now. There's like Anim School, Animation Mentor, I Animate. There's lots and lots of opportunities for people that I'm envious of. I think people have lots of opportunities to get into the industry and learn from world-class people that didn't exist not that long ago. Like 16, 17 years ago, that was unheard of. And Animation Mentor felt like a godsend at the time.
Yeah. So you went through traditional school, didn't study animation in school, but then you were like, I don't know that I can do this traditional stuff. And you went and built a reel and went and studied animation on your own and built enough of a reel to get a job at Rhythm and Hughes and become an animator there. Is that kind of the way that I see that?
Yeah. So like in undergrad, it was, it was kind of like a generalist kind of education in 3D. There was modeling and texturing and definitely not enough animation to put a reel together or to think that you're ready for or I was ready for a production environment. So and my goal was just to get a job. It wasn't really to become like a fine artist or anything like that. So when I went to art school to get a master's, their goal, and understandably so, is to make you a fine artist, like you're getting a fine arts degree. So I just felt like, man, I want to just be focusing on animation right now. I don't want to do art history, and don't listen to me, students. But that's kind of where my head was at the time. So it was tough though. I spent 2 years after leaving school just working on my reel, and there were, I had friends saying, "Hey, man, I don't think this is going to pan out." So like, I wouldn't recommend that path. But I guess it built character or something.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people go through that. So, it's definitely the reality of it. And we're going to talk a lot about some of this stuff, but now you do a lot of technical stuff at Epic, which I imagine you learned through the process of working at Epic. You build a lot of the backbone stuff of the not quite rigging, but the blueprints and the state machines and that sort of stuff. So that's a whole different aspect that sometimes involves keyframing, but also involves a very different aspect to the work of being an animator at Epic. So, I look forward to getting more in depth on that topic, because I think it's a very interesting aspect that maybe you didn't expect when you were grinding it out, building a reel for those 2 years.
Yeah, sure.
Cody, let's jump in and chat with you a little bit about what brought you here.
Yeah, Cody Bellimer. I've been here roughly 10 years now. I did 2 years as an intern here. Actually went to school at Ringling College of Art and Design and went to their first game art design program. So like Ray, I guess my degree was very more like all over the place: modeling, environment art, lighting, animation. And then I guess my sophomore year, Jay reached out, or Alex Whitney back in the day reached out to Ringling College of Art and Design and was looking for reels. And I was just a sophomore and I had like a small, tiny animation reel. I hadn't done a lot yet, so I'd sent it out to Epic, not thinking I'd hear back. And then I don't know, a couple of months went by, and then I was back home in Vermont, and I got a call, and it was Jay Hosfelt, and he said, "Can you do a test?" And I did the test in like a day and a half, I think, and then the next day he called me and was like, "When can you be here?" And I got in the car and I was like, "I'll be there tomorrow." And then I guess the rest of it's history. And then I went back to school and I finished my degree as well, but I did two internships, and then I was on Gears of War for a bit there at the end, and then jumped around on a couple small things here and there with Ray, and then got on Fortnite pretty early at the very, very beginning, and then I was on Save the World. I've been on Fortnite for pretty much 7-8 years now.
Wow.
I guess I've been working on Save the World for a long time with Brian Campbell and a couple other people that have bounced on and off, like Ray and Alex. And then nowadays, I guess I just focus on gameplay animation for the most part. I've done a little bit of everything, which is nice at Epic. I do like that we can bounce around and do emotes one day, and then do gameplay animation, and then just cinematic stuff, events, stuff like that. So I guess that's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great, because Ringling is a very highly regarded school that has a very strong animation program, and it's very I think was one of the schools that adopted Unreal Engine and said, we're doing Unreal Engine, and
Yep.
that's what we're focusing on. And now it turns out really incredible talent. So I imagine that was pretty helpful in being able to focus your skill set.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of, honestly, when I got to Epic, I was still in the mindset of I was like, I'm gonna be a character modeler one day, and then I guess just as I got into it, I was like, this is, I really enjoy the gameplay aspect of it and whatnot. And being able to we started using Unreal Engine at a Ringling kind of around my junior year, a little bit of sophomore year, and that's when we started. Back in the day, though, when I was in high school, I was tinkering, Source and CryEngine and a couple other things, just messing around, and then that's what kind of got me into the video, wanted me to get into video games and whatnot, and then getting to use Unreal Engine though at Ringling though kind of helped us get an idea of what are normal maps and low polys and LODs, and getting more into that idea of becoming a video game artist.
Right.
Helped you kind of pick a direction.
I've got a question from Brian Hegany in our chat here. He's one of our esteemed academic partners, actually. And he's actually kind of asking about this, because you said that you didn't think that you had a good reel, but yet Jay still called you back. So I guess the question is, what was it about Cody's reel? Cody, do you know? Jay, do you know? Was it that he was using Unreal Engine? Was it The school knows Unreal, so that's helpful, or what was it? If you
it's
can
been
recall from 10 years ago.
No, it's been 10
moment.
years, but I do remember vaguely. But I do remember, we were looking for an intern, and we looked at several, and I believe Cody is the first intern we actually had at Epic. Like, that wasn't a concept we did at Epic back then. Ringling was one of the first schools we reached out to, and I think how many of our animators at Epic are from Ringling? Like, that they pump out some good talent. But I want to say,
got a couple. We've got at least three.
At least three. I mean, we got
some guys on the cinematics team. We got Clausen, who's from Ringling.
Yeah, right. I mean, we at least have 5 or 6, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, we were looking at reels, and Cody's reel wasn't long. I think it was like 3 animations, but it showed body mechanics. He understood weighting, like he understood the basics, and being that new to animation, you could just see that he had that initial, sense that you need as an intern, and you could just tell. I think he showed us some of his project work he did as well, and you could just tell he was cranking a lot behind the scenes. And when you compare it to the other interns, you can tell, like, hey, this is a person who's going home at night and working until 2 a.m. and not just doing just what the school's assigning.
And he still feels like his reel isn't good.
Yeah. Hey, that is one thing. The best animators I know are also the ones that are most critical of their work. So I think there's a little bit of a correlation there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things a lot of creators suffer from, though, is imposter syndrome. Has anybody else felt that in the past?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I think
just a little bit.
I think every animator is like, it's just a known. That's what we all if we all go out drinking, that's what we all end up discussing an hour into it. So, and it doesn't get better the older you get. Sorry, everybody.
Well, so
yeah,
this is a really interesting thing, and I think we thought we might get into it later, but we're into it now. We should talk about reels in many ways, because what I kind of heard you talking about is that what you saw in Cody's work was just good animation work, good animation fundamentals. And one of the things, Mark, Tom, and I, we used to travel all over the world and visiting academic institutions, and we sort of still do in a virtual capacity. And what we, I know for myself, I go to schools, and sometimes you go into school and there's 1,000 animation students. Sometimes there's more than 1,000. There's 1,600, 2,000 animation students. That's a lot of, people studying animation. And that means that there's 1,000 people working on a reel, being taught, a lot of things. So we're talking about the context of AAA animation and game animation in particular, but you didn't say he had a good game reel. You didn't say any of that stuff. You just said he had good sense of mechanics. He just understood, and you could tell at an early point that he was going to get it, right? And so, and I don't know if you all are involved in reviewing reels or whatever, but maybe just for everyone who's participating and viewing this and might view it later on YouTube, you guys can talk a little bit about what is good animation, what is good reel content, what should all of these schools be helping their students understand about putting in. Because one thing, we've had recruiters on the stream too, and everyone says you get 30, you don't even you get 10 seconds, you get 5 seconds to prove that you know what you're doing. What needs to be in that 5, 10, 30 seconds that's going to do what Cody did for you, Jay, and so on. Ready, set, go.
Well, yeah, I'll speak from my experience, but so in the past, the animation team would usually go through all the reels, and like you said, if you have 40 reels, we don't have time to watch 2 minutes of every one, and we could tell within 5 seconds if we're going to watch the rest of it. What's cool now is like recruiting teams and HR teams are now so savvy; they know animation at least enough to know. So they'll actually filter out some reels if they're just not up to speed, because it just saves us time. So you really have to shine, like you really do. And I think the best thing to do is go out there and look and see what other student reels look like, and go. And sometimes animators, I mean, we all sometimes can't see the flaws in our own work, because when you're looking at your own animation, all day, your brain kind of puts this like beauty filter on it. And so you really do need to go to someone else and say like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? Like, I think that's my biggest tip is like, as a student, get your reel in front of other people first, get the feedback. And sometimes you're going to get harsh criticism, but that's the best kind to get, because if you don't get that criticism and you just send your reel to a company, it's just going to get lost in the shuffle if it's not up to speed. And that's just kind of a harsh reality now because there are so many schools, so many reels coming. So, do you guys want to add anything to that?
Sure. I'd probably say like to tailor your reel to where you're applying. You know, like if you're applying to Infinity Ward or somewhere that makes first-person shooters, I would make sure that I have some like first-person reloads. You know, some regardless of where you're applying. If you're applying to a game studio, I would want to see like some good locomotion animation, like maybe like a jog or a sprint to a transition, like to a pivot or something. Like I think that would be a good to see. Kind of echoing what Jay was saying, like I would also, you know, take the knife to the thing. Like it doesn't need to be longer than even if you've been in the industry for a long time, I think 2 minutes is a really long reel. And I think that like a minute is like a good length. And a lot of times there will be a really good reel, and then there'll be one or two things that are like just suspect. And you're like, could he not see that this wasn't good? And it'll make you question, like if those things weren't there, the reel would have been like 100% better. So I would just be brutal with, you know, just trimming it, you know, and, you know, sometimes we're like, well, I worked on this project for like 3 years of my career. I don't want to not, you know, have anything to show from it. But if it's not plussing it, if it's not a plus, it's a negative, it's a minus, you know?
That's great advice.
Yeah. That's something
that's so true. And we have hired with especially students with 30-second reels. I think Cody's was maybe not even 30 seconds. Yeah.
You said it was just a few clips.
Right?
Yeah,
keep going. I was like, I hadn't done much at that point. I hadn't really done a lot of animation at that point, so that was about all I had.
Really great point you made there. A trusted second pair of eyes, somebody who can actually give you the hard criticism, that will make a huge difference.
And that's definitely And that's how it is for the rest of your animation career. That's what we have dailies once, twice a week, and the biggest pros still get harsh criticism. And sometimes, you never get to a point where that's not going to happen. Like that's just standard. So it's good to get used to it early.
And I think that's like one of the things that really separates professionals, you know, from amateurs. Like you're here to service the project and the product. And even if you disagree with the notes you're getting, you know, it's the director, the like animation director or the creative director, it's their call. Like they have the vision and there's obviously seeing something that you aren't. That's a pet peeve I've always had my entire career, or people who like push back on notes in dailies. And I just like, where do you think this is going to go? Like, do you think he's going to change his mind? Like you're going to have this argument. I mean, it doesn't really happen at Epic, but in VFX, especially, people would push back and it's like, they're not going to change the note. Right. Like, so I feel like that's something that you have to really develop is like I know some people call it like a white belt mentality. It's like always seeking to improve yourself and taking feedback, you know, as a way to get better. And even though it might mean you're just throwing away days or, you know, in VFX, sometimes it would be weeks of work, right? Someone would change their mind about a shot you've been on for a while. But in the end, you just have to hang in there and know that this is going to make it, you know, make my shot better. And it's good practice, right? We all need to practice our craft, and redoing something is practice, you know.
Yep. One of the things I think it can be difficult for people to do at the start is to separate criticism of something you've done from you as a person. And it's really important to realize that criticizing your work is actually being nice to you. It's being very kind.
Yeah.
When I got here at Epic, I definitely wouldn't have grown as fast as if I didn't actually like reach out to people like Ray and Alex and Jay for feedback. So not only should you be taking it from them when you're in dailies, but also like trying to search out that feedback, because that can really help you like grow really quickly. And don't be afraid to go ask someone what something looks like, because usually they're super happy to give you some notes.
I know that you said that if you are tailoring your reel to a particular studio, you should pay attention to first-person reloads and that sort of stuff. Do you guys typically care what you see? I know that some students will they'll put things on their reel that maybe they worked on in a class project, but I also know that there's tons of free rigs available online. Does it matter what you're looking at? Does it have to be a game asset? Does it have to be done in Engine? Does it really make a difference if you're seeing stuff in Unreal Engine? Does it make a difference if you're seeing stuff in Maya or Max or whatever the case is?
No, I don't think so. I think we'd rather just see play blasts from Maya. As far as the rig goes, I don't think it really matters what rig it is either. As long as it looks good and kind of demonstrates that stuff that Ray was talking about.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add too is some of these schools do hand out a rig for the assignment. So I know Animation Mentor for a while, you'd get reels and you're watching the same reel 5 times in a row because people were showing you their assignments. And so it was refreshing to see someone who did go out and get their own rig and do their own thing. So I think that's the thing to avoid now. Just compare your reel to other students in your class, and if you guys are all showing the same work assignment, that's even if yours is the best assignment, you did the best in the class, you're still at a disadvantage because people reviewing the reels are just kind of getting lost.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think that's something which myself and Lewis were both involved in judging the rookies, and there's a huge amount of talent there. But if you see 20 projects that are basically the same project, the first couple you may think they're great, and then you have to go back and think, so which of these is really the good one? And because they're all dealing with almost the same thing. So it makes it easier if you actually have something which is different from school work.
absolutely, that's probably the biggest thing you could do.
Being remembered as well as part of your show reel is kind of important, because when you've spent a day looking at reels, if you can remember the one that had that thing that happened in it, can be really useful.
And again, one other thing I will mention is sometimes you get an animation reel and you can tell they spend a lot of time making the effects look good and the cameras, and you're just like, man, you spent 2 weeks on effects where you probably should have used it fixing up the animation. We don't care. We don't care how good the effects are. It's not plussing you to put a lot of effort into something that's kind of a distraction.
I was just going to ask, is there anything that you just really shouldn't do, or anything that's just become kind of a cliche where when you see it, for the 30th time that afternoon, you're like, oh, that one again. All right. I mean, it sounds like obviously if people around you are doing the same thing or it's the same, I'm guessing for a while you saw a lot of flossing coming in and maybe a little bit of that, I always refer to it as kind of like the Photoshop lens flare sort of thing, where it's like, it immediately is like a very big negative. Is there anything like that in the animation world that when you see it in reels or wherever that it's just kind of cringy, as the kids say? Do they say that?
I don't. Yeah, I actually try. I always feel like if I start getting cringy or feeling cynical, I actually try to check myself, because I'm like, hey, that person put a lot of effort into it, and so I really do try to step out of that perspective, right? And but I don't know. It's been a while since there were trends like that. For a while, everyone used the same Chemical Brothers soundtrack on their thing, or like I said, I think the biggest one was Animation Mentor reels for a while. It was just the same recipe, but that seems to have gotten better. Can't think of anything. Can you guys think of any examples that just I mean, honestly, if it's a super cringy reel, it's bad. It doesn't even get to us. It gets stopped by.
Just a question. A lot of animation schools actually push an awful lot of sort of the acting side of animation. And a lot of what we've been talking about so far, I think, is more the body mechanics and weight and these kind of things. Do you find a good blend of these in reels, or do you see some schools are really heavy on one side or the other?
It's I mean, I think Animation Mentor was, more on acting, which is fine because for a while that's what we needed to ramp up on when we were doing Gears of War cinematics. We needed some animators that were very skilled in that. So, and that's good to have. Like, there's always roles for that as well, and that's not less or greater than in-game animation at all. In fact, like it's good to be well-rounded in both anyway.
Yeah, I think, like Jay said, just being good at both. I mean, there's guys that are like really good at acting performances that are also super, super talented at physical stuff. So, I mean, it's kind of, you can kind of be good at both. I mean, you see a lot of, I feel like if we saw a good acting reel and then had a little bit of physical stuff on it, we'd still, look at it, obviously.
Yeah, and you could see that too, because sometimes when people do acting scenes, maybe it was the assignment, but they're like sitting in a chair, kind of like leaning with an elbow on the table, and all the stuff is just here, is fine. But then you see someone else do like an exact same acting piece, but they're standing up and like using a prop, and that just shines more, and they're putting effort into the weight shifting and their performance. But yeah, I don't think it's like a huge dichotomy between the two.
Well, so if I may, I'm sorry, Mark.
It's okay.
We we could probably spend the rest of the stream talking about reels, which I think is would be interesting in that context. But I think that one thing I'd like to do is to as I mentioned, we spend a lot of time visiting schools where there's just these thousands and thousands of students that are focused very much on animation. And I know that I taught at a school that had thousands of students studying animation. Many of them thought that they really wanted to go work at Pixar or DreamWorks or animation shops that were going to go do feature animation work. That in many cases didn't really understand maybe what it meant to animate at a game studio and what the nature of that work is. And maybe I'd like to spend a few minutes, if it's all right with you guys, talking about what the work is in a game studio, because maybe there's instructors out there that are teaching animation, traditional animation, that aren't aware of really the nature of the work. All right, so naturally there's cinematics work, which Jay, you're doing some now with a special projects team, or maybe that's some of the work that you're doing. And certainly in the game studio, there's tons and tons of cinematic work, which aligns a whole lot more, I think, with what you might expect if you are studying animation and thinking that you're going to go work in a feature animation shop. But then there's a whole bunch of other work that you would do in a game studio, like gameplay animation. And maybe we can discuss that a little bit, because Cody, you do a lot of gameplay animation, and Ray, you do a lot of gameplay animation, and Jay, you've done a lot of gameplay animation. Can we sort of just have a few minutes of discussing really the nature of the work that you would share with somebody who is not fully aware of the nature of your work as an animator? You guys have been doing this, all of you, for 10 years plus at Epic, and it seems like it's pretty exciting work. And you would probably say no thank you if Pixar called you today and said, would you like to come over and work with us? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But it must be really exciting animation work. What is the nature of the work?
Ray?
I mean, one thing that I think differentiates like games from, if you watch the making of a film on DVD, and my experience working in visual effects is the amount of collaboration that like an individual gameplay animator has with other departments. My experience, at least in film, was, you would get a shot that was already laid out. It had been storyboarded. If it was the background maybe had already been shot. So it was pretty set in stone what needs to happen in this shot and go to it. But in games, there's so much more freedom to collaborate with, the effects artists and the sound guys and the gameplay designers and everyone kind of puts their heads together on these things. So for, like a new Fortnite weapon or something like that comes in, there may be locomotion animations that need to be made, which is a pretty set template. We know there's a jog and an idle pose and a targeted idle pose, maybe an aim offset. But then there's also like, how long should the reload be? Can we do something cool there? Like, maybe this is a Marvel character's weapon or some licensed, IP that we can make the reload or some of those anims really interesting and cool, and people can kind of riff off ideas with one another. And I think that's the part that I love the most about working on gameplay, is that it's just a big collaboration, and you're working with people who are just incredible at what they do, and everyone is like bringing, in the best case scenario, everyone's really bringing their A game, and things can just kind of sing when it all sort of fits together. But the day to day kind of depends on what the assignment is, right? Like if it maybe is a new character or maybe even some kind of creature, like if we're working on Gears or every project and depending on where in the life cycle of the project it is, that varies a lot also. Like Paragon, after the first maybe 5 or 6 heroes, we had a pretty set template, like these are the anims that we need for this for these characters, but you still had so much like freedom of expression and their ability animations or the recall animation, and you try to get as much character as possible even into their locomotion, just running around. We want this like fallen angel character to have very different jog and even a really different jog stop than this big huge monstrous guy with chains coming out of his arms. And that's kind of the big picture, and then you just have to kind of break it down into these pieces, and that's a long process, but like I said, it's like a big collaboration. On Paragon, Jay, it was like what 120 something animations per hero.
Wow.
We finally got it down to.
Yep, that was the list. Yeah.
So that's like there's a lot of little pieces there, but you kind of have this overall idea of like what should the attitude be. You kind of have this list of things to make, and like I said, that's on a game that has like a really well-worn path, right, for the heroes to come through. But say on Fortnite, there may be something completely new, some wacky vehicle or something we haven't done anything like that before, right, Cody? And that's like a totally different. It's hard to even know what anims need to be done at first.
Yeah, I think, going off the vehicle, like new content stuff, it does turn into like a very much a black box where it's like, if we're adding a new enemy or we're adding, like Ray said, a whole new vehicle type, new weapons, like we've even added, like weapons that kind of have different gameplay mechanics and stuff. And I think there's like it never gets like stale essentially. And I think the big thing for me on gameplay that I kind of talked to Ray about it like a long time ago, was like, I think the coolest part about gameplay animation versus like working in probably like feature and doing like a shot. Doing a shot is like awesome and you get to like make it perfect for that angle. But the cool part about the gameplay animation is like if you're working on like a character or an enemy, like you're making like you guys said, preparing on like 120 animations that all come together to then form this character, and you're not going to see him just one time. Like how many hours do you think people have watched the Fortnite character jog around or like jump and sprint and reload and like
Right.
Whereas like in a film or something, like they're going to look at that like one time. If they love the film, they're going to see it a handful of times over the years, rewatch that film and like memorize those shots and that's awesome and you get to see that. But there's something about the gameplay side of it where it's like, oh, I get to play the thing that I made.
You immortalize
cool.
it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really like super rewarding. And then I think as the gameplay animator's job is to like, not only does it need to look good, but working with the designers and stuff, it needs to feel good. And like, does it feel like crunchy and like, does it feel smooth and does it feel like it deserves to be there? I think there's a lot of stuff as a gameplay animator that you can kind of like get that opportunity to like do something interesting. And I think I just that's what I love about animation and games. It's not said and done. It's like it's constantly going to get replayed over and over again.
Yeah, and I know for me, there's a sense of instant gratification with gameplay animation. You could do something and you get it in immediately. It's like just it being interactive and it's just alive so quickly. There's something kind of addictive to that. Whereas, I've never worked on feature, but it's the do your shot, send it off, see it integrated in later, see it in the cut. But whereas this is just like, it's like instant and your feedback's instant.
Well, so the feedback is, how do you guys do it, right? So, first of all, I know that I worked at Blue Sky, and sometimes, for movies like Ice Age, some of the animators would own a character, and so they would get a chance to develop the character a little bit. Is that the case? And do you guys work in war rooms where if you've got a character that you get to develop that character and you get to own a set of animations so that you can get a feel for it or that sort of thing? Or, and are you in a war room where you get to collaborate with people and you get to do your reference material and you get to stand in the middle of the room and go, how does this feel? How does this feel before you actually build the animation? And do you build that animation in like Maya or whatever, and then throw it in Engine and kind of mess with it before you actually put it in and have the controller drive it? Or, what's the process? Because I know in a film, you kind of play blast it and you watch it over here in this small little box, before you actually watch it ever in context, right? Like what's the context of animating in a game in that way?
Paragon was like this perfect scenario where an animator really got to own the character. They would be the animator assigned to that character would be in the early meetings with concept people, and they could go back and forth and kind of had this like core group of stakeholders in the character, like effects and audio, concept, modeler, and the animator, and then the designer. And they would just kind of take it from the beginning to the end. So you kind of had this set group of people kind of just forming these. That was a really clear process where people got to really have a huge impact on that. Whereas I would assume, Fortnite, it's one character set across multiple people. So it's probably more like per weapon type, right, Cody, or per vehicle, but you don't really get a one defined character.
Yeah, at this point, like I guess the male and female body types are it's pretty nailed down. It's kind of been the same animations for a long time. It's just a template that you're kind of filling in at this point. When you get if you're gonna do a new assignment, like you'll own that weapon, and someone usually will own the vehicle, or someone will own a new gameplay feature. Especially in the emote department, someone's gonna take that emote all the way to the end. There's definitely still like that ownership of individual gameplay, like mechanics and features, I guess.
And in a perfect world, when you start working on something, like you hope that there is a design prototype stood up in the game, so like the hooks are there that you need to plug your animations into. And generally, we'll try to get animation in, and everyone has their own kind of philosophy on this, but we'll try to get animation in as soon as we can, because you need to see it in context to really get a feel for, is your idea going to work? Is the timing going to be okay? And sometimes we'll put something in, and design will get back to us like, hey, if the hit frame or whatever was a little bit sooner, or if I had a little more like time on the back end or whatever. So that's some a little more of the collaboration. But I think in general, at least for me personally, I try to get just blocking animation into the game as soon as I can, and then not try to refine anything until it's gotten some kind of buy-in from design and from the other people that sort of depend on the anim.
Yeah, it's weird with animating in Maya versus the engine, where you do something that feels good in Maya and you get it in there, like Ray's saying, and then you realize that, like, oh my god, that needs to go like another couple hundred units, or needs to go like a whole tile further. And you're just like, you didn't realize in Maya that it was like, it looked great in Maya, and then you get it in there and it's like, oh, it's just terrible.
Yeah, it really shows how like the concept of space and time is so just subjective. You could be in Maya, it's awesome. It might even look too fast, and you get into game and it just feels like molasses, and there's no rhyme or reason. It just, so you have to get it in game.
And so you guys, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, it's a very interesting point of how much that the feel, the gameplay drives the animation. Sometimes once you get it into game and you're playing it, the actual gameplay oversees the animation, and when you look at some gameplay animation critically, if you're talking about the difference between offline or feature animation, sort of animation, gameplay animation, often if you watch a replay, you're like, wow, that animation does not work. You just jumped straight up and then did that. There was no, all you kind of have to let some of that go. And I know I got an animation degree and I learned a lot of like squash and anticipation. And then when I tried to do some game animations, I couldn't quite get it because you can't have anticipation. When you hit jump, you have to start jumping. So it's, like you said, it can feel totally fine here, but once you actually play with it, now you're like, oh, that sluggishness is missing. And back to the point of like trying to go for the job that you want to get, if you're doing gameplay animations and you're not getting them all the way into engine and playing with them, then they're not really there. So it's such a big difference between that, just like preview animation and then it actually in game with everything else.
And I think Ray said it once to me, like, you get your animation done in Maya, that's your 50%. You're at the 50% completion point right there. Even though it does take the most amount of work sometimes, you're still only halfway done with the assignment,
And something else you touched on a little there was how much animation can actually impact on gameplay, and gameplay can impact on animation, and getting the balance between those can really make or break how these things work for the whole game.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's probably like the bulk of our job is always, or that's one aspect of our job is with the designer, and just that push and pull on what looks good, what feels good. And I think after working in games for 10 years, I know the three of us here understand that gameplay really does rule. Like we can't convince a designer to spend 3-second ramp up speed for a jog start. Or something.
Yeah, and they shouldn't, right? Like,
and
it makes the game worse. There's like a certain amount of humility that you have to sort of have, that we are, trying to support whatever timing feels good. Like if they put a gray box model in the game and play with that instead of the character mesh, like whatever, and they find timing that feels really nice and snappy and is fun to play with, like that's the challenge, right? That's why we get paid to like figure out how to put an animation on that feels physical and interesting and appealing. And sometimes you'll look at, we download tons or we record tons of videos and frame by frame through them of other games, and you'll just see a held pose, that flies through the air, but it feels really good. And, it's like, and that's what worked. And that animator, good for them. They had the sense to do that, and not to insist on having some like flourishy, soft, thing that may have looked great in Maya, but would have felt terrible in context.
That's the black belt mentality, right?
Yeah, right.
And again, with that, one of my friends who's a great game animator said to me one time, difference between working in film and working in game is in film you can have somebody actually sympathize with their character or feel some kind of similar emotion to them. Whereas when you're playing a game, they become that character. So it is very much about a feel that the player has when they're actually inhabiting the character you've animated.
I think you're touching on something that's also super true, Tom. I think there's like a big learning curve. I feel, well, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a huge learning curve, but when you get into gameplay animation, like you were talking about, like jumping and stuff, like I think those kind of animation concepts in games, I think are kind of one of the more difficult ones to understand. Or it's just that like you're doing animation that's attached to this capsule, and this capsule is what's essentially driving the player through the world. And
right.
When you realize, the quicker you realize that, you're like, you get away with a lot more, stuff, and realize that like, oh, like as soon as the player presses jump, the capsule's no longer on the ground; it's going straight up, and can't really get there's ways you can try and cheat the compression frame or try to cheat other stuff, but there's a lot of and a lot of times the animations that are anything that's like translating through the sky or through the air or anything, animation's not driving it. It's like someone else is driving it,
Yeah.
And trying to figure that out.
Again, I remember working on ball and bat type games, and you could never actually get the bat to hit the ball, so you have to fake it by moving the ball to the bat.
Yeah. I think like one of the dark arts of animation is how far you can push the character out of the capsule before programmers start to notice. I can keep the character on the ground and the capsule can just go to the moon, and then I'll catch up in a few frames. We'll just see how long it takes someone to notice that.
Wow.
Yeah.
You just revealed the biggest secret of the stream, didn't you?
Oh, I apologize, animators. I'm sorry.
If it's a multiplayer shooter, they'll find out in 0.2 seconds.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there'll be Reddit threads like instantly.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting is the amount of work you guys do in Sandboxes, and I think that's kind of a cool thing is that you bring stuff into Sandboxes and you will prove a lot of stuff. And I know that there's you go onto Twitter and there's a lot of animators that will post their Sandboxes of cool things they're doing, particularly in Unreal Engine. I know I follow somebody who there's somebody that does this really cool wolf animation, and they're doing all really cool mechanics of this wolf running around, and they are doing this they're building new mechanics for how the wolf's IK works in the sandbox, and they're posting this stuff. And I wish I remembered the developer's name, but it's prototyping in a sandbox for what the game will eventually be, and it's really awesome to see testing to make sure that it's going to work eventually. I know that Cody, you do some of that stuff, and I imagine Ray, you've got tons of sandboxes. So you bring in your stuff, you hook it up, and you get the tech working underneath, and then you bring it into a sandbox, and you make sure that before you bring it into the actual game, that all that stuff is driven, right? Am I correct about that, or can you speak about any of the sandboxes you guys might use?
Ray could probably. I know Paragon has a whole gambit of maps and stuff that they use to test stuff. But on Fortnite, most of the testing that we do is usually within, a kind of a shared test map, that the designers and all the artists are kind of using. It's usually just that first test where you kind of get the animation, hooked up, and you want to look at it, and there's just a simple map that you can get in there and run around, and you have access to all the weapons and all the abilities and everything there, and just an easy place to get in there and find stuff quickly because everything's about time. So
like the
faster
beginning of the
you can do it.
Matrix, where you jump into the Matrix, you're like, give me all the guns.
Right. And like Cody said, like you don't want to have to take a break for 2.5 minutes while you wait for the level to load, and then wait a minute while it opens in Pi. If you can have a test map that opens almost instantly and that launches almost instantly, like you can work out most of the problems before you actually have to open the whole huge level to look at it. So anything that we can do, and if you're working with the AI, like maybe just a gray box with some AI spawners, you can walk up and trigger to spawn them, and then spawn more if you kill them. Where if you had to load the whole map where AI are kind of procedurally placed, when you kill that first camp, what do? You have to reload the level. So there's way having test maps like that just make it so much easier to test and to repeatedly do like a specific action. So much of like fixing bugs or polishing something is just doing that same thing again and again and again, and looking at it and recording videos of it. So it just makes sense to have like really specific setups for whatever you're working on.
And it's definitely a good pre-production tool as well, because if animation needs to test climbing systems, slope systems, jump heights, we don't want to wait on the environment team to finish their stuff. Like we got to get it in fast, and so it's kind of like storyboarding in a way. And a lot of times we test something in a sandbox and it fails, and it's fine. We had that test map, it's there, but we move on to something else. So it's a insanely useful prototype tool.
So before in a few minutes, we'll actually turn the stream over to you guys and ask you to share some of the stuff that you prepared. But I want to touch base once again for those folks that maybe not quite as aware of what happens in game animation versus traditional film or television animation. I want to ask a little bit about the difference between gameplay animation and cinematics animation, and describe how different it might be if you get because in gameplay animation, that's pretty much 100% keyframed, at least at Epic, right? You know, you guys are doing almost, at least for Paragon and for Fortnite, that's all hand keyed work. Is that correct?
Paragon had a mocap basis, and so some things like cycles, it was like mocap plus, but then
Right.
some moves were at the end of the day like 95% keyframe. So it was a mix. Like mocap was just a tool to get you your end result, which it always should be, right? You're never going to mocap something and just put it straight in.
And then Fortnite gameplay is keyframed, hand keyed.
Yeah, pretty much all of it's hand keyed for the most part. Emotes are all hand keyed. Gameplay is mostly all hand keyed. There's like a few places we've used it here and there, like cinematics, and we've used it for blocking and stuff and getting, if something's like, I feel like mocap and it's where it's really good is obviously like that small detailed stuff that's like just the stuff that would just take you forever to animate. If you can use it for that kind of situation, we've used it on Fortnite for that kind of stuff, like just adding noise to stuff, and use it for reference as well.
Right. But a lot of the marketing material and things that we do with some of the movies and that stuff, you guys, or some of the team, the animation team, will work with the mocap stage, and they'll bring that stuff in, and that's a very different type of workflow, and that goes to the cinematics team. And there's tons of animators, I don't know about tons. There's animators at Epic that work almost entirely with mocap and work in a cinematics pipeline, which is very much part of AAA animation at Epic, and so we've got different types of animators at Epic. We've got your gameplay animators, and you've got your cinematics animators. And I don't know, is there much crossover? Do you have folks that flip flop back and forth? You got people that stick almost entirely to cinematics animation, and folks that stick almost entirely to gameplay animation.
I think that's kind of changed over the years. There was a time when our animation team was so small that everyone had to jump on whatever was on fire, or almost everyone. And now Epic has grown, a lot, and there's a lot more specialization. There's a dedicated cinematics team that have cinematic only, animators that never touch the game. So I think in general, it's, I think for most of us who have been here a while, we're here for that, time whenever we did cinematic and gameplay, and we still occasionally, we'll do that. And even like one part of Fortnite where we use mocap extensively that people may be surprised was the robot versus the kaiju fight that we had. Mark Donald and I got in mocap suits and just wailed on each other for a couple days, and so that was something that it just wasn't feasible to keyframe, right? Like that was like I can't remember how many minutes it was now, 3 or 4 something.
A lot.
It was a lot. And that's just a daunting amount for 2 characters fighting and interacting and traversing this world. That's just a daunting amount of animation to do, and we never have that kind of a time on our schedule to do something like that. So a lot of times, we'll get asked to do something, and then that's what determines what tool we use. So if it's a super broad, fast ability animation or something like that, we're definitely going to keyframe it, because mocap would be almost useless. Like, if you put me in a mocap suit, I look like a frumpy dumpy, just, I look terrible. I'm not going to do like a cool Wolverine move or whatever, but if you're saying, hey, we need these like 2 monsters or these 2, things to fight for 3.5 minutes long, we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to have to figure this out in mocap some way or another. Sorry, my dog's barking. So that's, that's kind of part of that.
Yeah,
sorry, my dog's barking like crazy.
Okay.
No, I mean, like Ray's saying, we I know him and Mark like did a ton of like basically like the previs for the monster fight and whatnot, and we were off. A lot of us were off on gameplay, doing gameplay stuff, and then sort of towards the tail end of it, they called a bunch of us on, and I ended up taking something that Ray had done a lot of work on already, and kind of just going in there and just just adding stuff, just adding toes and fingers and changing slight notes that Mark had or Ray had or whatever. So it's kind of on those situations, it was definitely it's very much a collaboration of dudes getting there. But we extensively used that mocap in that previous animation that Ray did.
Oh,
And
interesting.
Mark did.
Yeah, and when you are getting mocap data and you need to make it work, it's the animator skill set you're using. Like it's not like some different skill set. It's the exact same stuff. So it's not like there's a different like kind of animator we need for mocap versus a keyframe animator. In fact, the keyframe animators who have dealt with mocap a bit tend to learn some stuff from dealing with it, and vice versa. So it's definitely. I mean, I'm some animators sometimes do get snobby towards mocap, and I'm the opposite. I'm like, oh, it's cool, it's useful. So.
Well, it's
there's no 100% organic keyframed only.
Fortnite was that for a while, I have to say. I mean, Fortnite is still a lot of that, and rightly so. That it has a style that I think mocap would have kind of felt weird in if it was just so obvious,
Yeah.
So it's a but it's a learned skill, isn't it? I mean, because you're getting when you get mocap data, you get like this, animation graph that's just layered with keyframes, and then you've got to put in your keyframes somewhere in there and go, how am I going to actually interpolate between all that data? And you got to learn that skill. It's not intuitive, I would presume. It's something that you either have to teach yourself or somebody's got to teach you.
I mean, there's a technical aspect to it, and years ago, modifying mocap data was actually just kind of downright impossible. Like before they had layers and all these tools, you kind of just like were stuck with what you had, or just you were brutally like untangling that spaghetti of curves. But I think now, like if you get mocap, you're actually looking at it and you're breaking it down to what masses are moving and what arcs are moving, and like you're still breaking it down. It's almost like you're backwards engineering a move so you could then re-edit it as an animator. So that's why I think it improves animators, because you actually get to look at, you're breaking down a reference.
That's cool.
In 3D.
I like that.
And you do get to see these like graph curves of like, oh, that's, for me, I was taught, when I first started, my instructor taught me that when you do a walk cycle, your hips are kind of like in a figure 8, right? But now if I look at mocap data, it's not. It's more like a cradle rocking back and forth, from the front more times than not. And it's just these things where you're like, you get to study. With mocap, you get to study motion on this like molecular level, so it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Wow, you should be a lead animator. You are a lead animator. Well, Mark, Tom, do you have anything before we hand the stream over to ask these guys, or did you see anything pop through them?
A couple of questions. You'll probably get the same questions I have. You go first.
Fine, I'll go first. I've got a question here. How much expectation is there for students to understand the technical aspects of gameplay animation, like blend spaces, state machines, anim sequences, poses, anim graphs, etc.? Is this aspect expected to be demonstrated before getting a job for a student, or is it part of the onboarding once you get hired?
I think we would generally consider that part of the onboarding, but anything coming in is a plus. So the greater background you can have, we don't expect you to be like a senior animator pulling this stuff apart, but just having some notion of the concepts. And there's so many learning resources now. I kind of throw down the gauntlet and say there's no excuse not to know the broad strokes, right? Like there's plenty out there. It's not like 20 years ago when everyone had this beat up copy of the Animator survival kit and like the illusion of life, and that's what everyone had and that's all you had. Like now, the YouTube is just busting at the seams with tutorials and explanations of how this stuff works. So I think people, you don't have to be a ninja, but I think you should be aware of what these things are and how they kind of fit together. Do you agree with that, Jay?
Oh yeah, like I'm on Paragon. The onboarding process was like get your computer set up, and then you're going to spend the next 3 to 4 days doing our third-person tutorial series that Wes Bunn had put together. Even today, if someone joins my team, that I still give them that. If they're like, hey, I need something to do immediately, I'm like, man, just go through these things, because it covers like your blend spaces and state machines and your event graph, anim graph. So I don't think we expect you to know, but you're definitely going to probably be asked if that interests you. You know, if you're like, oh, I don't want to mess with that technical stuff, which is good to know. There are jobs for animators where you don't have to get dirty with that stuff. But a lot of times we do have roles where we expect you to understand it.
Another question here is about the software selection for actually animating within. Are there preferences? You mentioned Maya quite a bit. I'm guessing Motion Builder for Mocap. And there's obviously a lot of interest at the moment in Blender. Is there a preference in terms of hiring or in terms of what's used internally?
We use Maya and Motion Builder internally, but there's no nothing's going to hurt you if you come in as a Blender animator and your reel's good. That's fine. Like all those concepts are across all engines, and in fact, we'd probably really like to hear from a Blender animator and fill us in, because I have never used Blender, so I'd love to hear from someone who has.
And we've got a lot of. Sorry, keep going.
Oh no, I had nothing else to say. Go ahead.
I was gonna say we've hired a lot of going off the Blender thing. It's like we've hired a lot of animators that have worked in other in film and stuff that have been working with different proprietary animation softwares and their own in-house stuff. And when they come here, they're essentially learning how to use Maya. And I guess as far as inside of Maya, I think the only other thing that I'm really using a lot lately is Animbot. It's just a plugin for Maya.
And whenever I hear this question, it reminds me also of, I think maybe 20 years ago or something like that, Victor Navone, who is just an insane animator at Pixar. I don't know if he's still at Pixar, but he made this green alien lip sync animation using this software called Animation Master, I think it was called, which was the most ghetto animation. It was $99 animation tool back when Alias Wavefront was thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And he got a job at Pixar, because his animation was great. If anything, using a low rent tool and making something great is more impressive to me than, if you can beat a Ferrari with your Prius, that's more impressive to me, So I wouldn't feel like there's any kind of concern about showing a reel that has Maya or Max or whatever on it. I think no one really cares.
Yeah. I know there was guys. I saw a guy this is a long time, quite a while back, but he was working in Source Filmmaker, and I don't think he was even really opening the graph editor. He was just hammering away, making poses. And the animation was awesome, and I think he actually got a job somewhere. I don't know where he went. The animations were amazing, in Source Filmmaker.
Well, let's jump into some presentation, shall we? I know you guys prepared some material. I'd love to share it with the stream. How about Cody? Would you like to go first?
Sure.
Well, if you would like to share your screen, I think we're ready. And I know there's some other questions coming in, guys. We'll get to them, but I'd hate to not get a chance to share some of this amazing stuff that these guys prepared. So we will get to them, and we'll have plenty of eyes here that will.
The videos I sent you, did you want to play them?
Why don't you? Yeah. We'll do that. You let me know whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Second. I was gonna say you could just play the Fortnite player Anim one, I guess.
Fortnite player Anim coming right up. Here we go. Ready?
Sure.
Does that one have any audio?
No, they don't have. I don't think any of them.
All right, so that's playing on the screen right now.
I just kind of cobbled together some stuff from, I guess, just to give people examples of what gameplay animations that we're kind of doing, and I guess the first little video I put together was just showing off I guess some of the base animations that you'll see on Jonesy for the most part, the main player character.
You want me to play it again?
Yeah.
I'll play.
Did it actually play?
Yeah, it played.
It is.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of it's just showing off, I guess, just some of the jog sets and some of the just overall what it is that we have that base core jog set, and then we started with the assault rifle when we first got going on Fortnite, and that was the main started with, and we started with the jog animations, and then from there on out, we started building out all these archetypes. Eventually, we just kept adding. Fortnite's a split body character for the most part in the game. He's split at the hips. So as we've gone through the game, we've added swords and different pistols and different rifle types and all that stuff. And as we've gone through, we basically reuse that lower half, and then we just keep adding more on top. Same for sprint animations and reloads and all those things. They just kind of get glued essentially in a way on top of this upper body. And how do I actually see it, Luis?
It's actually playing on Twitch. So
okay, I guess I can just load up Twitch.
It's just I've got it pretty much looping, so you can tell me to move on to the next
so
one.
I was just trying to show a couple animations. There's a ton of animations that end up making up the main character. But yeah, I guess that's just for the most part. And then if you want to play the gameplay one.
Gameplay animation, combat melee. Here comes here's now you doing your reference.
Yeah, I was like, I know you guys asked for some this is what being an animator is like. I mean, sometimes we have to, like Ray said, you go get and put in the mocap suit. So this next clip is just kind of what Ray and Jay been talking about was that getting that rough first pass in game. So it's the first one was me in the backyard shooting some refs, trying to act out what the combo might look like based on what the designers were asking for. And then we knew they were we want a four swing combo. We want it to go X distance. We want it to possibly be this cadence. And then I went into Maya and then got in that really rough really pose to pose four poses. And then they eventually were hey, we want one more swing. So I kind of added that extra. And then when I realized when I got it in game, it didn't go really far. It's hard to tell in the final gameplay video, but I ended up stretching it out a lot further than I would have thought to put it. Yeah, I thought it was just be a good video to show this is kind of what if you get into gameplay animation and you're doing some abilities and stuff it might be you get in that really it doesn't look great, but at least that first step towards getting something in game, and then later on you can then work with get in there and really actually start polishing stuff. And each attack eventually ends up having a transition in and out and all this stuff. And you get in there and you add in. We have a really nice system that helps us string all the animations together, and it chooses when to play and when not to play things. And you can really get in there and fine tune when you want to trigger the next attack. You get in. I know the designers at some point. I usually end up working with the designers pretty closely with trying to figure out what is the feeling of they're not specifically going in there and saying oh, it needs to play here and then play that and then play now, and I'm going in there and sliding all that stuff around. So it's kind of going back to I guess what Ray was talking about, where we do end up spending a lot of time with the design, working closely with them and trying to make sure that it feels pretty decent.
The animation is so fast and so crisp and snappy, which I like. I like the sharpness of the animation. Is that something that you put into the actual Maya keyframes, or is that something that you manipulate?
Yeah. So actually, this animation is animated at 30 FPS, but then in engine, I noticed a lot of times, especially with gameplay animation, that we'll end up rate scaling stuff a lot of times. So on this specific attack, what you see in Maya is actually playing, I don't know, so the one in engine is roughly playing about 20% faster.
Interesting.
So I've just noticed with some of the melee combat stuff that we do that it just doesn't, you do it in Maya and it just doesn't feel as good. And then sometimes, I don't think I did it on this attack, but I've done it on some other previous animations where when you needed something to go super quick, a lot of the times I'll animate it at that super poppy, quick, maybe it's these giant gaps between frames, and then I'll then put it at 60 FPS, and then I'll animate it at 60 FPS to then help fill in some of those blanks. Because you'll notice a lot of times with some of these like gameplay animations, if something's covering a big gap, with anim trails and stuff on effects, the anim trails just don't follow that smooth curve, like that you want. Like you want that nice like smear frame.
Right.
And a lot of times, if you end up going back into that animation and animate at 60 FPS just to fill in those gaps, you'll get those smoother, arcs in your animation. I know on Paragon you guys did that a little bit, right, Ray?
There were a few characters. There was one character that had a whip, and man, it was so hard to not make that, because rotations are already hard in 3D. Like you get into these like gimbal situations, and that whip had this long chain of like FK joints, and it would just flip between frames, especially if the animations would get compressed. It was just a debacle. So I think Alex Whitney ended up having to export those at like 120 or 240 frames per second. Like I mean, that's unusual, right? Because the memory, the performance people will start banging on your office door if you start exporting animations like that, because the memory footprint gets huge really fast. But some things, it just can't be helped.
Yeah. We've done that. We've done that 60 FPS stuff on like some fire animations and stuff like that need to be all out snappier. And sometimes with doing it at 60 FPS, you're sometimes able to add in like some dead frames to really like sell something, to get something to snap harder. Like we've had I know most of our fire animations have like a frame of dead frame that's sort of so that the effects will get a chance to like flash faster. So just little tricks like that are super helpful when you get to polishing something, I guess, at the end.
That's crazy. I mean, you got to imagine movies are at 24 frames a second. So, and you're, thinking about 60, 120 frames a second to be able to really sell something. And, we're talking a lot about next gen now. And you think, with next gen and high frame rates becoming much more kind of a thing, even kind of mid-range laptops are starting to ship with 120, 240 hertz screens, and the new Xboxes, they're all high frame rate. Is that can be even more of a thing where you're like digging in and finding those little spaces to improve, and these like are people, do you feel like people can sense that and feel those, like you said,
I mean, if you go look at
in a 60 frame per second animation?
if you go look at like a shooter game, most shooter games, or most any games right now, and you crank your monitor up to 144 hertz, like you get up to like over 200 hertz, and you slow mo that stuff, like you're gonna see animation frames, in there. So I think as we get further into the future, like I know with like getting an actual live rig in the game, like I think some of that might be alleviated where we're actually getting to actually like smooth out that stuff in the engine.
Yeah, I mean to ask animators to make the content at 60 or 120 is like no one could. There's no time in the world for that stuff. So like I think we will always do 30 with hopes that interpolation get us through, and of course we'll always have our cases where we need to go more. Yeah. But that's still a budget issue, because it's like you're not going to default at 120.
Right.
That gives me anxiety.
So they can go back and compress.
Why would I even bring that up? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Very triggering, Tom. Thank you.
I think what Jay's talking about is, exactly like, hopefully the tools get better to where that interpolation isn't a problem.
You've got the Fortnite Other Anims. You want to play that one?
I just cobbled together a couple other videos of just like, here's,
It's rolling in the background now.
Can I call out Cody real fast? He made the floss animation. I just want to know.
Yeah.
Cody doesn't get enough fan mail.
So
and
his
email,
like,
his personal email is, I'm going to scroll it on the screen now. No, I'm not.
I didn't put any emote stuff in here. Ray's done a bunch of emotes.
So
shield charge.
Nice.
But I honestly, since I've been at Epic, I haven't made a reel, so I was like, let me just put together some animations. It's like digging through a box. Like, what's in here?
Can you actually floss though?
Oh yeah, I did do this. Ooh, neat.
This is your life.
Did you do a reference for the floss? Is there a video of you doing the floss somewhere?
I think I might have did a video.
Yes, that's for the next stream. Can we promise that
Next
on the
stream.
next stream you will show the reference of the floss? That'll keep them coming back.
Sorry, Cody.
Yeah, right.
So
I know-
there was a question and a couple of things in here, the mech specifically, about non-bipedal animation, like multi-legged animation, mech like these non-standard, non-human. Is that beneficial for students to learn? Is there like, does that help them stand out at all if you see some, 17-legged creature beautifully animated? You're like, well, I didn't know you could even do that.
You want to say Ray? Or?
I mean, I would say, yeah, like anything. I wouldn't spend too much time on it. Like if it's going to be a huge investment in time, I might not do it. But if there's like a lion rig or a dinosaur rig or something out there, absolutely, because you never know what's coming down the pipe, and you never know when you may get hired at a studio and the next project has tons of of creatures and stuff in it. So I would definitely, if there was a reel and everything else is equal and the one had some cool quadruped animation on it, that's a big standout to me for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was curious what you said, because I was like, I know every time we see a reel with like some cool animal creature on it, I get stoked. So I think that's like kind of one of the dream. That's one of the dream things that I like think is cool to tell in gameplay animation. I mean, just in special effects in general.
I've got a soft spot for dragons.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pretty hard.
Getting to animate. I think what really, I mean, definitely you should learn how to animate bipeds like well. But I think what's interesting about working on creatures and stuff is like you're pulling a lot of reference from like similar real life things and really studying that reference, and you can really kind of see how good someone is, and they can look at reference of like a bear or a wolf and really like figure out what it is that makes that thing move that way.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add before we hand the stream over to Ray?
Nope. No, I think that's it.
It's
Awesome.
cool stuff, Cody.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
fantastic.
Yeah,
It's
thanks for
awesome.
sharing that.
The floss. I'm going to remember that. Well, thank you very much. Ray, I know you've got some stuff you want to share as well.
Yeah, sure. So when Lewis asked me to do this, I started trying to think of like, well, what would have been good to know like coming into this studio. So I tried to just throw down a few things, and the first thing I would say is more of like a philosophical thing. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I heard a guy named Seth Godin. I might be botching his last name, but he said if it doesn't ship, it doesn't count. And he's not a game developer, an animator, but I think that is like a really good philosophy to have as a professional creative anything. But as a developer and an animator, I think that's a really good philosophy. If it doesn't ship, it doesn't count. And to me, that means like no matter how good your work might look in Maya, you can indulge yourself. You can spend your whole budget polishing that thing and really making it sing until that it's in the game and in context and in a player's hands. Like it doesn't really count, So I think it's important to remind yourself that that's the context that it's going to be appreciated in and used in, and that's where it needs to sing. And sometimes that might mean you do a lot less work on an animation than you had planned because you plug it in, and it's blocking and it almost feels good enough, and you do a little bit more, and you still see some problems that need to be fixed, but you move on, to the next thing because it feels good. The designers think it feels great, and you don't spend, a bunch of unnecessary time. That's something that I've seen again and again especially for inexperienced people, they'll spend their entire budget in Maya and then throw it over the fence to the gameplay designers or the programmers, and then those guys will just completely butcher it, right? They'll speed it up. Like Cody said, his animation was sped up 20%. That's not that bad, but I had a boss fight on Gears 3 that was like this giant spider, and the programmer wasn't working on it while I was working on it. So I finished all the anims, then he got it, and I went back to it like a couple months later when he'd finished his pass, and some anims were sped up 300%. And I was just like, bro, if it needs to be that much faster, you need, like, let me know, you know. we can't ship it 300% faster. So all that's just to say, like, it's very, very important to think about the context your work is going to be shown in, and be sure you spend your time, you know, wisely, right? Like, make sure that the amount of time, like the time you're spending is going to pay off. And you know, all of us want to do really polished and great looking animation that we can like send play blasts to each other and high five and have a great time in dailies looking at it. But ultimately, you know, are we serving ourselves through that, or are we serving the project? And we have to, you know, remind ourselves like, hey, I've got to, even though it's kind of humbling to put in proto work, you know, and some people, especially non-animators, are like, well, you're going to fix that, right? Like, that's not, you're not leaving it like that, are you? Right? And it's like, no, of course I'm not. But you know, you have to sort of be confident enough in your abilities to put out work like that, knowing, you know, that it's going to be like this for a week or two, and then I'm going to get time to polish it. But I need to make sure that, you know, the timing of everything is settled, and it's good to, you know, to move forward with. So that's my number one thing. If it doesn't ship, it doesn't count. Another thing that would have been very helpful for me is coming into gaming. You know, I didn't go to school for gaming. The concept of like animation graphs and state machines and all that was totally new for me, but it's something that I've, you know, spent a lot of time, you know, working with and thinking about. So I'm going to try to give kind of a bird's eye view of how that works. And I'm going to share my screen because I made a very, very low effort PowerPoint presentation here. Here we go. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So on every frame of like an animation, a stop motion animator, the question he's trying to answer is, what should the pose look like on this frame? And that's the same thing that the animation blueprint is trying to do also, right? The animation blueprint is gonna take all these inputs and it's gonna spit out a pose. So this guy is saying, how should I pose this guy? And he's getting input, you know, from the director, from storyboards, from timing charts. He's got to think about, you know, what pose he's coming from, right? Like, he's got to think about how fast is this action. All these things are going to influence and determine like what the pose on this frame should look like. And similarly, you know, the animation blueprint is trying to figure out the same thing, or we are, you know, through that. Like, what should the pose on this frame be? And it's going to get input instead of from a director and from storyboards. We're going to get input from like the environment, from the player or the AI controller, from the pawn. We're going to, you know, we need to know things like, is the character moving? Is it on the ground? Are we in the water? You know, is it holding something? Is the character, you know, dying? You know, there's lots of things we need to know like what the right pose is for this frame. And sometimes we have to do that ourselves through Blueprint, you know, like in the event graph of the NMBP. Sometimes we might have animation programmers to, you know, hook all these up, and we just have little variables that say like is on ground or is DBNO that we can, you know, just plug in. But those we have to take that input, and then the goal is to get an appropriate pose kind of on the other side of that. So how do we get, you know, all the info that we need? And anyone who is fired up an animation blueprint, you've recognized these two nodes, right? You've got like update animation and get a pawn owner. And basically, you know, so many people have very little understanding of like what they're looking at here, like get a pawn owner. And basically this is whatever is owning, you know, this anim blueprint. So in the game, there's going to be a character, which is a pawn, and it's going to, you know, own this anim BP, and we need to get information, you know, from this pawn owner. So we can ask things like, what's my rotation, right? Like, I can get my control rotation from the pawn, and I can get, you know, my location from the pawn. But if I ask it like, am I DBNO? It has no idea. The pawn doesn't know what a DB&O is, right? So we need to ask like a more specific question. So in the same sort of example, a stop motion animator can say, hey, is there a director in the house, right? Like, can someone tell me, like, give me some notes on this and some input? And a director can only give, like, a generic director can just give you kind of generic information, and he'll say that performance is flat, right? Or he'll say cut on the action or something like that. But we need, more specific information than that. So we'll say, well, can we get an animated movie director, right? And they can give us better notes than a generic director. Like, so they might say the performance is flat and the arms are twinned, right? Like, these guys know a little bit about animation, but it's still not enough to really know what our pose is. And in the same kind of vein, we can instead of just asking a pawn in a generic kind of pawn, we can say, well, cast this to a character. And it seems like casting is a hard thing for animators to get their heads around. It's like a concept, I guess, that programmers have no issue with, but for animators, it's like, man, that's really hard to kind of understand what that means. And I think it's basically like saying, instead of saying, is there a director in the house? Say, hey, if you're a director and you're an animated movie director, like, I need to ask you some questions. So a character, we can ask like more things. We can say like, what's your acceleration, right? And the character can give us this that the pawn doesn't know anything about, right? Like, and more than that, like, we can get more good things that we need to know. Like, if we just start looking, in this, we can get the health, or we can get the velocity. There's like tons of information that a character has that a pawn doesn't. And then if we go one step further, which we're going to need to do if we're going to figure out what the actual pose is, we'll get the director of the movie that we're actually working on. So in Nightmare Before Christmas, it was Henry Selick. And we can get really, detailed information to know what the pose should be. So he's going to say the performance is flat, the arms are twinned, and Jack shouldn't be smiling, right? Like, that's the info we really need. And in the same vein, on Fortnite, at least, or on this, this kind of test project I'm working on, we need to go like one step further, and we can cast this to our player pawn, so a Fort player pawn. And now we can get tons of information that's like super helpful. Like, we can get what kind of weapon we're holding, right? And the character has no idea about weapons, and the pawn definitely doesn't know anything about weapons. And the real power of this, I think, once you kind of wrap your head around casting, like if you hover over this, we see we're going to get a weapon from this, but then you can cast this to something more specific. So we'll cast it to like a ranged weapon, maybe. So yeah, there's Fort weapon ranged, and then you could keep going there. Like a ranged weapon, it probably has a concept of like ammo, or how much damage it's going to do. So we could get how much ammo we have. We could also cast this to an assault rifle, right? And then we could get information about the scope or the laser sight or whatever. So as we're trying to figure out what our pose should be or fill out our animation blueprint, we need to to look into the world and see what state the character is in. By doing these simple casts, we can get more and more specific animation, and then we can even take what our pawn has and find out information about the things it has. Just like we can get the director of Nightmare Before Christmas and then ask him about other movies he's worked on. It's like, hey, tell me about James and the Giant Peach or whatever, right? Like, so this is really, really, really valuable and something we use all the time. And even on projects like Fortnite that have a team of animation programmers, whenever we're just trying to prototype something, if you can do this stuff yourself and say like, okay, I've got this new weapon, and when the weapon gets down to one bullet, I need to play this like specific animation. Like, you can cobble that together yourself really quickly with just a few blueprint nodes. And then, you don't have to wait on a programmer to get time in their schedule to hook these things up for you, while you're working on this currently. And in the same vein, something that people kind of sleep on, I think, that's really, really helpful is the class viewer. And it's just under Window Developer Tools Class Viewer. And in this, you can see like how these classes work. So there's a pawn, the most generic thing, and a character is like a child of that. And then we have a Fort pawn. We have a Fort player pawn. There's also an AI pawn. So like, we could cast, like, if this is going to be an AI character, we could cast to the AI pawn and then get information, that's only specific to an AI. So I find that like very, very helpful, and I use it constantly. And I find so many times people will be stumped by things that if they just knew, the right sequence, or that they had the ability to cast from a very general thing to a very specific thing, they could get through the problem they're having. And then I'll go back. I'm going to milk this analogy a little bit further. So this guy said, "Oh, another crowd shot." Right. One of the things about animation is it can get complicated really fast, right? And we've definitely had that issue on Fortnite. If we look at like this anim graph, like that looks nice, right? It's all laid out cleanly. It's obvious, we can see where things go. It looks like it would be easy to debug, right? Like we could watch this while we're playing. But then if we sort of dig into this, oh my gracious, like we see there's these big, and Cody can testify to this, right? Fortnite used to be full of these.
Yeah, a lot.
There are these nodes that say like, hey, if I've got a shotgun or a melee weapon or an assault rifle, we're going to have all these different anims and all these different, poses are going to feed through it. And you can imagine if every one of these states had the similar set of like 30 animations inside of it getting selected, it's just a nightmare to like debug, to update like a weapon, and to figure out why maybe some pose is off. So there's no magic bullet to taking care of kind of complexity like this, but I think it's important to think about it from the very beginning, and to keep thinking about it, right? Like, so there was a time when this was how everything was done. I mean, every state had something like this in it, and it was a pain. And then we thought a little bit more about it, and we made these little, it's a structure, and I can quickly do something similar, but basically like a little asset that then could hold like, what's my idle, what's my downsights pose, and then you could just have an entry for each weapon, and then you would just slot a bunch of animations over here and plug one node in on this side, and just let the event graph pick depending on what the weapon is, and that made things much better, right? Like, and this is what one of those structs look like, and you can make one just by going to blueprints, structure, and it just makes kind of like a generic empty structure, and then you can add as many variables as you want. You can make them anim sequences, they can be aim offsets, they can, so you can populate this with, this is my idle pose, this is my jog animation, this is my aim offset. And I made like a little test one here, you can sort of see. So there's an idle, a downsights, a blend space, an aim offset. You could also put like, what's my desired blend time? It can be a float a variable also. And small things like this can make a really big difference in how readable something is, how easy it is to update and to maintain. And I've found, at least, that when things are clunky, you just don't polish them as much, right? Because you're like, well, it could be a little bit better, but it's going to take me 15 minutes to update all of these states. I just don't have time to do that. Where if it was like one click, you would definitely make that little change to make it 1% better. And then, so this structure was how it was for a while, and then it's evolved even to this. Like now we have this anim asset that the coders made that's like much more detailed, and it has like all these little flags that can be set. So I'm sort of showing that just to say, over the course of your project, you just have to think about, like, things are getting complicated. How can I make sure that it doesn't get out of hand to a point where it's a pain to deal with, and we don't want to have to deal with it. And sort of this is like week 3 on a project looks something like this, and everybody's happy. It's easy to update and to debug. But then year 3 is like that, and it's nobody wants it, right? You don't want to be anywhere near that. It's terrible to debug, and so I think from the very beginning, as you're starting out, you should just keep in mind that things can really quickly get out of hand, and what can I do? What small things can I do incrementally, and how can I revise what I've already done to keep it from turning into this like spaghetti monster that happens so often, right? Like Jay and Cody can testify the pain that it is when it gets to to a point like that. So those are a few things that I thought about that I wish that I'd known from the beginning.
That was very helpful.
Sure.
That anim graph there at the end there, is that a real thing?
Yeah, I think that's a real one. It's not from Epic, but it's a real one.
Oh
man!
Even with our best intentions, those things can just one day of not spending time on your decisions can cause that, and it happens all the time. And sometimes you almost like think, well, this is a faster way to do it right now. We'll just do it this way. We'll clean it up later. And you never have time to clean something up later.
Yep.
And then you end up layering on top of it. So like Ray says, take the time up front and like think it out, for sure.
That was really, really helpful. I was watching people comment while you were presenting at the clarity that you helped explain to a lot of people. Just, the way that you tied that into, talking to a director and the different people in a film. That was really well done. Thank you.
Oh, sure, no problem. I mean, I feel like that there's nothing really that complicated going on. It just helps to sort of have a frame of reference to think about it.
I'm going to borrow that, as I hope a lot of people on the stream that teach are going to borrow that reference.
And real fast, like I want to add one point of clarity and ask Ray, like, that Fortnite pawn is a blueprint, right? It's a blueprint that a designer owns, and the designer is populating that with like some bool or just the variables. So knowing who also made that is also good to know. Like almost like asking the director's mother.
What is the director's motivation?
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Being able to like reach out to the designer and get some more context for why things are the way they are is definitely helpful.
Yeah, that collaboration between animator and designer. I've done it, VFX and designer, UI and designer, being able to very quickly understand each other's kind of world that you're living in and be able to ask an effective question like, hey, could you expose a variable that lets me know when this is happening? That's something that you could hack together and kind of suss out using some hack together code. But if you know the director's mother, so to speak, you could just say, hey, could you let me know whenever he equips a weapon, and then we're good to go. Just give me an event for that, or
and we won't get into it here, but goodness, the can of worms that's like the stuff that happens only on the server or doesn't happen on the client. That's like a whole other oh man. It just makes you want to buy lunch for like a programmer to say, hey man, just make this somehow spit into the Anna blueprint for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Great insight.
Jay, you ready for us?
I'm ready. So I was trying to think about what to talk about in AAA and being an animator on games. And, one thing I love, like it's actually my passion, is like kind of the prototype process of games and just various techniques, because making assets for games is super expensive. And so prototyping is where you get to like just try all these things in the cheapest manner possible. And so I just wanted to talk about that and our methods we used for our Unreal Engine 5 demo that we released earlier this year. So I was going to show some videos from that. So I think the first one I'll show, what did I call the video?
We've got flying, climbing, and VP virtual production.
Let's do, thank you. Let's do the flying. So I'll talk about this. So early on, when we were just discussing this project, we didn't even know what we had. We kind of had some pillars of like show an open world. We're going to have a character running. But flying was one of the first things we wanted to try out. And so the designer gave me a capsule where I could hit one button on the controller and turn on like a really rough flying model, like a flying mode. And that was it. And just so I could just show them, I quickly made a quick like Anna blueprint with flying and running, showed the team that. And then, the conversation went to, well, what else could she do while she's in the air? Well, you don't want to start getting into these even more complicated systems to set up. So you could rewind a little bit.
Sure.
Actually, I don't think I'm timed right with the video. I'm watching on Twitch, so I'll let it loop. So when you guys watch the video and you see like the wings drawn on and stuff, that was like the super cheap way to show like some concepts. Like we could go to the designers and say like, "Oh, what about this and this, and how would we do this?" And they tell us like, "Well, that would be hard. It'd just be easy." then in the process, we decided to drop the wings because it just didn't fit the character. So I did another pass to say like, well, here's what it would kind of look like. We could put some effects on her flying. And then of course that went to the conversation of like, well, what could she do to touch the environment and wall run? And so here you'll see like the red stick figure character, and the drawing animatics were done by Ed Fornolls. And he would only spend a couple days on these, but we got to show it to the team and say like, is this what you're thinking? And then also we could break it down and say like, hey, what's the budget if we were to do this? What kind of animation tech do we need that we don't have? The environment team, could you guys support adding all these markups on the buildings and whatnot? So it allowed us to like get a visual up so everyone could talk about it and prototype. And then of course, did this video, I'm looking at the video now. And then of course, all these elements contributed to that final flying scene we had in the demo. And while we didn't make that a main part of our demo where we're interacting with the world, we had all these like prior cheap decisions we had made and things we had shown. So we kind of had this shorthand language with the team. We had a lot of buy-in on style, and we had already talked about what kind of effects she would have if she was flying and what kind of interactions with the environment would she have.
That was
So this
super
is
cool.
like a step through of the prototype, and I'll show another one real fast, the climbing prototype. And this one I'll just go through briefly, but it's the same kind of thing. We knew we wanted climbing in the world, and before even the environment team worked on it, we were thinking like, well, we need modular pieces. Well, if they're modular, we need to see what kind of gaps can she jump where it looks reasonable, and what's a human width handhold that you do. And so we're kind of like getting to all these like widths and defining the rule set for it. And then we kind of set it aside. And like after prototype, we're like, okay, well, we might do climbing, we might not, but if we do, we kind of know some things we need. Then once we hit full speed production, it kind of came to us and said, yeah, we're gonna have climbing in this one section. And this is where Ray Arnett came in, and Ray owned the climbing you see, the final climbing. And Ray looked at it and was like, added so much, just like getting in and being technical. And Ray, like, do you want to speak to like some of the solutions you had for the climbing, like the dynamic additives and stuff?
Yeah, so if you watch like videos, I mean, I'm not a rock climber, but if you watch videos of people rock climbing, what you never see is them return to an idle pose. Like their pose, it varies depending on whatever they're holding and the terrain that they're on. So one of the goals that I had was not to constantly go back to an idle pose. You can see in the proto, she kind of goes back to this kind of hang with her two hands together and her feet there. So I wanted to figure out a way we could sort of get away from that. And without going into too much detail, we sort of did these dynamic additives where we could just end the previous animation in whatever pose made sense. Like if it was a climb up, maybe have the right hand high and the left hand a little lower, and then use dynamic additives to make the next animation match that end pose. So it became like a quite a technical challenge, but it was also a ton of fun. And what I really love about gameplay animation was kind of encapsulated in this process. But that was the climbing. And originally, like, you were going to be able to just climb all over the place, right, Jay? Like it was like a much more open. And then by the time it was finished, I was like, well, I guess I could have just animated that on Rails. But it was so it was a little over, I guess. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but whatever the dumb word is for over engineered. Than what we actually needed. But it was a really fun, interesting challenge. And that's something that I would also say, like, people don't need to, there's a node in the anim graph called make dynamic additive, and no one should sleep on that because you can do really powerful things.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it until Ray showed it to me, and it's great. We can move on to the next one, but basically I just kind of want to show our prototype processes. So any of these videos you see where she's roughly climbing on the green and red geometry, those were made a matter of hours just to show the team, and or even a day or two, just to show the team and not waste a lot of engineering time and environment art time and that kind of thing. So yeah, let's move on to virtual production. So later in our process, we had all the story beats of our Unreal Engine 5 demo down. We knew the moments we wanted her to react to something, and walk through a crevice. And we had prototype animations in, but once we wanted to start getting final, we actually did a virtual production process where we brought the actress in, but we had the whole environment up on screen. And we would basically align her to the world at the time on the mocap stage. So anytime she's acting, she was acting at that spot she needed to act in the build. Because that way you see exactly what you get. And, if we need her to look up at a stalactite, we could actually see if her look angle is good. We're not just capturing something, then later fixing it. It's like what you see is what you get. And if you notice in these videos, I'm not looking at the actress on the stage. I'm staring at the screen. And so I did all my directing from just looking at the screen. Another thing you'll notice on this video is like Ray is using a baseball bat to hit her hand. So like, there's a moment where the mote rises in the air and it hits her hand. And, an actress could fake that kind of stuff, but like having Ray offset, Ray is invisible to the mocap, right? And so get all these like little details. And because the point is like when you are mocapping here, you want to get as much as you possibly can into performance and not say like, oh, well, animation will add it later. Because we are all guilty of that sometimes. But you want to get as much as you can. So you actually get to focus on the things you do need to clean.
That's cool.
And so yeah, here are just more videos of us getting to that exact spot in the game and seeing it right then and there. And this was the first time we did it, and it was just super, super powerful. And it kind of helped us. I mean, it helped us just from not making alignment mistakes or anything like that. And then there's a crevice coming up. So when we did the crevice walkthrough, we took a lot of tripods, very tall tripods, and we made those the touch points of a crevice. And so we'd have the actor stand on stage. We'd align, a contact point to her hand, and we could see in the virtual production if her hand is actually touching the rock. And we put props where she should step over. And then I actually had a camera that rendered in the viewport what the camera saw in game. So I'm just looking straight at the camera screen, following her with the camera, so we can get this crevice scene knocked out. And so I took like, maybe Ray, you were there. We did what, like 8 or 10 or 20 takes,
something like that.
But it just gave us a lot of content to work with, and because we didn't have time to make mistakes on this stuff, we had to get it right. And so virtual production was a huge tool in speeding up that process. Because like Gears of War cinematics, we went through three games of Gears of War cinematics, and there were so many mistakes we would make because you wouldn't see the end result in camera while you're there. And I would say 50% of the Gears of War mocap cleanup and animation work was actually getting a lot of the background characters from just like constantly swaying or just being in the wrong spot, or fixing up a lot of stuff that if we had the instant virtual production feedback, we would have had it done. I think if we had virtual production, let's say on the Gears of War cinematics back in the day, we would have saved months and months and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course the tech didn't exist back then, so it's not like, oh, I wish we did. But that's what virtual production is doing. We hear a lot of talk about it helping with film and TV, but it's also helping with games. Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, that's what I want to talk about with my videos here.
That's pretty amazing that what you showed us is like raw mocap, like what you're looking at on the stage. I mean, that is such a huge leap in what you can do, just from all aspects, from the technology side, the mocap side, Unreal side, all of that. I was just blown away seeing that, and talking about that being kind of that's the process and how fast that is. And so much of the next gen is about this interesting. We're at this point where you can do something like that with seemingly so little comparatively, and your quality is at this whole other level. But for the bean counters, you're like, and we're going to make it cheaper. It's I can't really think of a time in production where it's really had, you get your cake and you can eat it too. It's really phenomenon. It's why you hear us. I think we probably say virtual production at least once every single stream, or if ever go to a school. It's just, you're right. It's impacting every aspect of every kind of real time creative field. This ability to do this stuff live is such a game changer.
I want to play the crevice again while we're talking because that was so cool.
So, in games, it's like my take on next gen, back when like normal maps came out and the lighting things and people were like, oh, that's next gen. And people always ask like, what's next gen with animation? And like making animation is always going to be making animation, right? Like mocap, there's definitely going to be advances in motion capture and like, cloth and muscle dynamics, of course. But I mean, when it comes to animation, the biggest thing that holds us back in games is iteration time. And so like, back in the old days, like Ray mentioned, you would do 40 animation cycles, give it to a designer, and 2 months later see it in game. And your iteration's done by then. Like your iteration time's done. You've probably moved on to another character. And so at best you had a few days. And then over time we got to a point where like we can get it in. Like I can go mocap it, come back to Epic, get it in the game, and look at it and tweak it, and maybe even go back for another mocap shoot if it's wrong. But now we're getting to a point where it's like instant. Like we really, like on set one day, we were actually just trying to figure out what kind of walk cycle she needs while playing this demo. So we had the actress walk. Ray sat there and like made a loop out of it in Motion Builder in like 5 minutes, and then we're playing it. And so it's like mocap take, make your loop, put it in, feel it out. And so this iteration was instant. Like it was fantastic. And so like for me, next gen tools are like, rather than Ray having to spend 5 minutes making a loop, what if we have a mocap shoot and we do have a way to just tag a mocap animation, and we know all the smart ways to like make it loop, at least to a quality for prototype, and give the animators these tools just to like, it's almost like sculpting, like it's almost like sculpting with clay, where it used to is almost like chiseling marble, so I think for me, that's what next gen is for animation, or that's a big component of it.
So
one more thing.
Is there any other next gen like technique or like thing that, if you're teaching students that are graduating 2 years from today, like in 2 years, what should they be learning now so that in 2 years they're not 2 years behind, so to speak? It's a tough catch-22 in education. So
no, there's a point now where I was onboarding someone on our project last week, and we do have we've announced a lot of the UE Unreal Engine 5 animation features that are coming, right? And a lot of them are like brand new. Like a lot of us haven't truly tested it fully yet because it's still in development. And they were asking like, should I spend a lot of time learning, state machines and all the stuff we've been learning for Unreal Engine 4 for the past 5 years, however long it's been out. And but I think we're at a threshold now where there's actually a lot of new tools. Like say, for instance, Control Rig. If there was a student now who got the latest Unreal and started really digging into Control Rig, you were going to be one of the only few people that could be a Control Rig expert in Unreal Engine coming up. And there's going to be a huge demand for that. So we're actually, just like in nature, right? When a new natural niche opens up, life is going to find a way to like find it, right? So Unreal Engine 5 is opening up these niches, for experts or people to grow into being like, we don't have like the original Control Rig expert person who made tutorials yet. That still needs to exist, and that's going to come up in the next year or two. So I'd say students now look at these new features in Unreal Engine 5 and realize like no one's grabbed those yet. Like no one's grabbed those as like, I'm the pro, I know that the most, I'm the person you should come talk to. And so I don't know, that's my take. Right. So yeah, Control Rig, animating an engine, trying to think what else we have. And of course, like to this day, and this will never go away, like if you just know your way around an animation blueprint, we actually just started defining that as a real position at Epic. Used to, it was like you could be an animator who knows it, you could be a animation programmer who knows it, but is always kind of like, oh, they do that and that.
Mhm.
We do have a position now where it's like, yeah, you were like an animation blueprint, animation implementing expert. And so you could focus on that all day long. So yeah, that's the kind of things that are developing.
Yeah, I want to mention that for those of you who aren't aware, not that long ago, 2 years ago, you did a full 5-part training series that's still in our YouTube channel on the Paragon characters that dealt with assembling their animation blueprints. So that's what, 6+ hours of training on large parts of animation blueprints and assembly for the Paragon characters, and that was some really in-depth work in building those animation blueprints. We're really at this point 2 hours into the stream, so we probably need to start wrapping this one up. But can you speak a little bit to that training? Because I think that that was really valuable material, and that's still up there.
Yeah, so that training, and I said it in the training, is I wanted to show someone how an animator like me, because I'm not going to tell you I'm a good technical and blueprint expert. I know how to use it, but I wanted to go into that thing saying like, don't be afraid of this, because I'm just a gameplay animator, and watch me use our tools for this, because if I could learn it, you could learn it, right? Like Ray could teach you like a freaking master course on this stuff. But yeah, it's nothing to be afraid of. Like get in and dig around and tinker and learn. Like it's okay to drag off variables and see what they do and try things. And there are a lot of times there's multiple ways to solve an issue. Like if you watch my videos, that is not the way to make an anim blueprint for a game. It's a way to learn what anim blueprints do. And if you do the techniques I showed, the way I did it is like the kind of easier to grasp or harder to grasp. And each time you kind of have to learn a few more nodes to get more complicated. But what that leads to is you're going to come up with something no one else has. We just hired Caleb Longmire, who did the advanced locomotion system that's on our marketplace.
Amazing.
Right. And
for free.
So what's that?
The locomotion system, there's a free version of it in our permanent collection.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so, he's outside of Epic and he knows stuff a lot of us didn't know. I'm asking him questions because he's just this like, that's all he's focused on for years. He's a superpower user. So I guess my whole point is like, start tinkering. Like you're not going to learn it all at once. And if you feel like it's like overly complicated, it's okay. Like you kind of just grow and it becomes more clear of how powerful it is over time.
And also, way back to the beginning of the stream and imposter syndrome, etc. Even folks like Jay and Cody and Ray, they don't know everything and they can't do everything. And, they've got their strengths and their weaknesses and things they wish they had learned in school and things they still want to know. And, sometimes they're like, I'm just not good at this. I'm going to go call Ray and he's going to hook up the blueprint for me. No one knows all of Unreal, and that's a really good point. Is just take it one step at a time, figure out that one thing. There'll always be an infinite number of other things to kind of tackle. Don't get overwhelmed with it. Unreal is kind of a big application.
Kind of big. It's kind of big.
Kind of big, and where I think we might make it bigger. If I had to guess,
it could happen.
There's a chance some stuff might be added, and so yeah, for trying to learn and trying to start, it can be really kind of a bit much, and that's a really good advice. Is just get a walk cycle in.
Yeah.
Go yeah.
So
that's huge.
Guys, have you seen, as we're starting to wrap up, some questions that you wanted to pop through?
There was one just back there a while ago about the use of a program called Cascader, which is a physics-based animation tool, and also the idea of using AI modules in Motion Builder. So these interesting technological advancements, are they changing the way you work now, or do you think they will change the way that you work?
So Cascador is, what it is ultimately is kind of like, it's almost like someone sitting there telling you that you're either doing it wrong or right. It's giving you this feedback of what the ballistics should be in physics. So as an animator, you could work on the pose and the timing and the jump, but it'll sit there and like turn red. Like, hey, if you didn't get the time of that arc, and if you push your arm out, that's going to change your center of mass. And it's kind of like this cool little guidance system you can use. So yeah, we're actually using. We're looking to use that. And we have been using it basically just as a tool, because it does make stuff look better. AI modules in Motion Builder, I guess I would need more clarity of what the AI module is. I guess that's using AI to like machine learn how to fix stuff, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong. If they can clarify, please let me know.
They're just saying, like the one that Ubisoft presented. I don't know the presentation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to speak to that. I mean, a lot of our focus actually is not on DCC tools to help, but actually Unreal Engine tools to help an animator iterate faster.
There is an interesting question about how technical do you see animators' role getting in the future?
It just depends, on the animator and on the projects, and personally, I've tried to like fit myself into whatever role the project needed at the moment, or the studio that I was in needed. Like the place that I was at before Epic didn't really have much of a pipeline, so I got really into scripting. And then when I came to Epic, there was a pipeline, and I really haven't scripted much at all since then. So I don't think there's like a single answer for that. I think if you have like a bent towards technical things, you should exploit that and try to use that part of your skill set as much as possible. If you don't have a bent towards that, and you're maybe a little more of a fine artist or something like that, I would lean sort of heavily into that. I think you just try to exploit your strengths as much as possible. And if anything, maybe animation positions get less technical in the future. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
Joe.
Well, I do. I think the pendulum always swings, right? It's like we've exposed all these technical tools to animators. So I have seen animators start using 50-60% of their time now doing that because they learned it, they're good at it. I think we should pull back from that a little bit for sure, but then it's always a superpower to understand how all the systems work. I feel like every team always needs a power technical animator user to understand that. You'll be better off for it. So I think it'll always be a superpower. Don't think it'll be a necessary thing though. Sorry, Cody, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I guess you both kind of said. I mean, I not really much to add there, other than I guess I feel like it's just gonna be kind of just pick, like Ray said, just kind of pick what path you want to go down. Like you can. I think the first step, especially coming out of school, is just be a good animator, and then try to just focus on becoming a really good animator, and then also while you're doing that, it sounds like a lot of work, but work on that technical, do those tutorials that Ray, Jay's talking about, and just learn as much as you can on YouTube. Like there's so much content now out there to learn all this stuff. Just do like the little small tutorials and just figure out like what a blueprint is and what state machines are and how to set up, like what Ray was talking about, casting and different types of variables, and how gameplay blueprints work with animation blueprints. I think and then I think on top of that, there's the level of understanding it as an animator, trying to figure out like how do I use all that tech to then piece together this animation, this pile of sequences. I know like Jay said, I think there's people that have gone down both paths. There's like guys now that they do very small amounts of animating. They're just power users, like doing the heavy tech lifting, and then you got guys that are just like, I just want to focus on emotes, or I just want to focus on polishing stuff. I don't know if that really added anything to that, but
all of that is such essential insight to what's going on at Epic, what's going on in the industry. It can often be, a pretty opaque black box from the outside. And, for educators, it's really key for them to have this insight. So thank you guys for coming on today and sharing your stories and all of this really, really great insight into what's happening right now, and really giving us, some videos of you in your backyard doing Wolverine slashes and stuff.
Absolutely.
That was such a gift, quite honestly. I really needed it this week.
Yeah, you know what I love is that a couple weeks ago we talked to the audio designers, and you get such insight and great depth into the role of the audio designers. We know that you guys work closely with those guys, and sometimes you think about game development, and maybe you think about the level designers or the designers, and or you think about the programmers, but man, look at the depth and the wealth of the role of the animator, and just the range of what you guys do, and how much we've had to discuss today, and such a privilege to get to talk to folks that have been doing it at Epic for 10 years and have worked on projects like you have. So thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully you guys will join us. We're going to do more of these kinds of streams, so please come back and join us for the next ones that we're going to do. In a couple of weeks, we're going to, we sort of have been following along the vein of looking at different roles at Epic, and different roles that we can help expose to those people that do teaching and training, but also to students, so that we can dig deeper into what it takes to work at a company like Epic, but also talking to veterans and folks that have that insight. So join us again next Friday. We'll be doing another stream. We'll let you know early next week what that one's about, because it'll be really exciting. And then in 2 weeks, we'll be doing an Understanding the Variant Manager in Unreal Engine, and that'll be a cool stream as well. Once again, thank you, Ray and Cody and Jay, for joining us today. And as usual, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark. And we will see you guys next Friday. We hope you have a pleasant weekend and stay safe out there. And we will see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
It was a
Bye,
pleasure.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Definitely.